maybe I can just give a little bit of background on each of the folks real quick, and then we can just dive right into it, because I personally think that engineering is one of the hardest things to do. It's the first thing that has to happen for a tech company to really start. But Charity, just to give you a quick preview, your background, you had engineering leadership roles at Facebook, Parse, as well as Linden Lab. Ron, previously VP of Engineering at BigCommerce.
Yes.
Senior engineering leader at Twitter and also Salesforce.com.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And then Loxy, you were actually an engineering leader at SigFig and D.E. Shaw, so some wide range of backgrounds. Great. Well, maybe just to get into it, I think one thing we've talked a little bit about here throughout the different panels is a little bit of the war stories. So, I think that in the journey of going to 1 to 100, there's these big difficulties, these big hills that you have to climb. Can you talk a little bit about some of those difficulties that you saw, or the toughest mistakes you made from the engineering side, and what were some of those learnings from the setbacks along the way? And Ron, you've had a wide variety of experiences. Maybe I'll just start with you.
Okay, pick on me first. Thanks, Ben. Lots of different experiences. As Ben mentioned, I'm currently at AppDirect. I was at BigCommerce, another commerce platform. Twitter, who is kind of renowned for the difficulties that we had migrating to a services architecture, and Salesforce. And what's interesting about all of those is that we all had our challenges. None of the companies was a rocket ship overnight. Like looking back, people think Salesforce must have been a total rocket ship from the start, but no, it was really hard. Even through our IPO, like within a year of our IPO, we started having system issues. We started having availability problems. And this is in the time when we were the flag bearer for what SaaS was going to be for this new generation, and we were falling down on ourselves. And so at that point, it was a really instrumental turning point for the company, where Mark and Parker and the VP of engineering at the time said, all right, we got to stop the trains. No more feature development. Let's harden our infrastructure. Let's make sure that this system's available.
And maybe just on that, since Salesforce now seems to be a smooth running ship, what was that? Was that the people? Was that the process? Was it the infrastructure?
It was, I think it was, well, I will say it's a combination of all of the above. Charity just said yes. It's true. And so every problem, I mean, like with respect to the company is the product. Also in a SaaS world, the company and the product relates to the customers. And we had, I guess, fallen into the trap of let's build more features quickly, as fast as possible, in the pursuit of more and more market share, more and more product footprint, and not thought more about sort of the non-functional requirements of the platform. Does it perform?
It's a smoothly sailing ship or whatever. I guarantee you nobody on the inside thinks that.
Oh, no.
Like, never, right? Like, engineering is, the hard part about engineering is not ever building the thing, almost never building the thing. It's figure out what is the right thing to build. And nobody gets this right the first time consistently, right? It's always a trade-off between, am I prematurely optimizing, or am I going to get slapped in the face in like 2 days? It's, you're always threading that, and teams will have a bias. I think that knowing what my bias is towards action and the quick and dirty, getting it done quickly, which is what you want your team to be built of early on, but that has to change, right? Your team composition has to change.
Well, Charity, was there a time at Facebook or Parse or any of the other places where you would categorize it as a big setback or a blow up?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, I mean, we built Parse in Ruby and Rails, right? One thread, where it was backed by single pools, of databases where we let developers all over the world just write their own queries and upload them. We had to make them all work without impacting anyone else. Write their own JavaScript. They uploaded it. We just had to make it work without affecting anyone else. Couldn't be done with that. And so we had to do an entire rewrite of the API. It's not pretty.
Got it. Maybe just to talk about some of the opposite side of setbacks, kind of liftoff or inflection points. Were there any points in the company's life where something surprisingly clicked in the right way? Something on the engineering or product side where when it happened, that key pivotal moment turned into something really great and it became smooth sailing? Maybe, Lox, you've been able to see that through the eyes of ZENEFITS.
Yeah, I think it feels that way externally. It never quite feels that way internally. Even when we were growing really fast, it felt like we were going to die every day. But I think From a product perspective, yes. From a technology perspective, yes. But I think it's more to the fundamentals. We kind of picked really simple technologies, simple things, simple processes, like nothing too complicated. We used AWS from day one. We used Python, Django, MySQL. You could find experts in all of these things when things go wrong, and there are plenty of them out there, right? And it turns out like simple is also much more harder than complicated. So although we started simple, I would kind of like be afraid to say that we still stay simple today. So I think that's one thing I constantly think about.
I really like the concept of innovation tokens that Dan McKinley talks about. It's like if you're a startup, you have 3 innovation tokens. Spend them wisely. You should probably spend them on your core differentiators, right? No, you should not start out by writing a new database or a new web framework, where you should choose simple, stupid, well-known, well-understood, because what is mature software? It is not software that doesn't break. It's software where the failures are well understood by lots of people, and you can Google it at 2 a.m.
And Charity, just for the audience, what do you mean by those tokens?
Those tokens are new bleeding edge software. A graph database, for example. At Parse, it was MongoDB. We spent at least 2 of our fucking tokens on that thing. But like, we grew it up with us. And everything else was dead simple. Like, you got 3.
So three special times, and no more than 3, to try something a little riskier on the tech
where
side.
you will have to become the expert in that thing. You don't have to be an expert in a boring thing.
I mean, when you're starting up, you probably want to use 0 of those tokens.
Well, but you have to do something different or else you shouldn't exist, right? You have to have a differentiator or why do you exist? So at Parse, like, it was MongoDB because we were trying to do something that honestly could not have been built before that because we needed a document database.
It depends on the business and what you're trying to do.
It does. If you're doing e-commerce, you probably should have 0. You're absolutely right.
I actually have sort of a different story with respect to using 3 tokens or 3 chips to bet on. And I would say that at Salesforce, we actually launched the same product 3 different times in 3 different time periods. So I joined in 2004. Shortly after I joined, we released our first version of what was going to be a support offering. And we called it, at the time, we called it Support Force, and it was a terrible name. And the product was like put together like with duct tape and spit. And we had a launch for it, and we had press invited. It was amazing, but it didn't really take off. And so a couple years later, we did another launch of the support offering, and then eventually we had a 3rd launch of it, which became what is now called the Service Cloud. And we said, okay, we need to figure out what our next billion-dollar business is after SFA, after Salesforce Automation. And it was going to be the support offering, but behind the scenes, you didn't know, like, we made that sausage 3 different times. You didn't want to know how the sausage was made, but we actually tried to make that sausage 3 times before it actually stuck.
There are times of charm for that?
There's another rule of thumb that I've heard, which is that you should never try to design for more than 10x what you're currently running. Because you're just going to be wrong about too many of your assumptions. You can design for 10x what you have, but you cannot design for 100x.
Actually, we'll jump to that for just a second, because I think that that's interesting. Then we'll go back to scaling. I don't know if you heard the question that I asked Jyoti a little bit earlier, but there's certain views that the customers know what the market is. And there's also the view customers have no idea what the market really is. And talk a little bit about that. Not only do you agree or disagree with that, and then more importantly, for the startups that are out here, what do they do about it? Should they just not listen to customers at all and just build on their own?
I think both are right at the same time.
Talk about that.
There are some things that the customer knows. They're using your product. They have pain points with that product. And nobody knows better than them because they use it day in, day out. So when they give you feedback about that, your support tickets are the biggest wealth of information you have. It's customers telling you every day what works, what doesn't. I was just telling,
what they don't.
Yeah, I was just telling Ben before the talk, if it were up to me, I'd have like engineers provide support for every product, no matter what it is. Because the far away you remove somebody from the pain, they don't feel it, they don't fix it. So that's where I think the customer is right. There are some things, some products where people are just so used to the process that they have, there's inertia. So you don't think outside and know that there is something better. Or you don't think that. That's when fresh eyes help.
I think that's saying is that you can't rely on your customers to provide the vision, but the implementation, the feedback is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think so.
Ron, do you agree with that?
Well, there's the famous quote from Henry Ford, right? Like, if I asked my customers what they wanted a faster horse. Yeah. And so we never had the automobile, potentially. So like, that's one interesting quote. Another interesting fact of like Twitter and how it developed was it was known as the messaging service that we didn't know that we needed. And it's absolutely true, because there was nothing like it before, totally public, totally open, a global platform. and then like maybe counting in threes again. No one really ever asked Salesforce, hey, can you also do service? Like, no, they just want to have great SFA. And Mark said, no, I want to do a service offering. And no one really asked for, hey, can you make a platform? Because SaaS was brand new. Like, people were just trusting their data onto our servers for the first time. And so no one ever said, well, eventually there's going to be an ecosystem of SaaS players out there, so build this platform. Mark had the vision.
Kathy Sierra talks about this. She's saying, if you're building a camera, you shouldn't be trying to build a better camera with better features and all that stuff. You're building a better photographer, and putting the customer, like, if you make them better at what they do and what they care about, like, they will love you forever. But it's a kind of flipping the lens.
Interesting. So maybe on that analogy, the photographer may not know what the better photographer themselves is.
Exactly.
So maybe you build that for them.
Yeah, at ZENEFITS, right, it wasn't immediately apparent to people that payroll, HR, benefits, all of these connected together with the entire ecosystem of apps is going to give you a better experience. But Parker was able to see that because he was the founder and he was dealing with that stuff every day. And he's like, there has to be a better way to do it. So sometimes you are the customer, and you can figure that out.
I want to ask the question that it's interesting, Alex, what you're saying is you think that engineering should support customers.
Yep.
What do you two think?
Absolutely. Those feedback loops have to be tight. I think that we've kind of diverged from the idea of people supporting the things that they write and they develop for a while, and no other model actually works. You have to, if engineers aren't exposed to the pain of what they're creating, they don't actually internalize how to become better at their jobs. And it doesn't have to be miserable. It doesn't have to be a sentence, but I believe that they need to be on call. I believe they need to talk to their customers at regular intervals just so to build their empathy muscles.
Yeah, I would second that. It's about empathy, customer empathy, and I would say it's more than just engineering, although engineering is a big component. It's about product as well. Yeah. It's about the entire organization. Yeah. In all the talks that we've had, many of the talks we've had here today at this conference, we've talked about how it's great to have a holistic view of the customer, not just to try to close a sale, but to make sure that we retain that customer. Or Teen mentioned as well, like SaaS has changed the way that the vendor and the customer interact because we can actually have sight of how customers are using the platform so that we can make it better. I would say it's more than just engineering for sure, but like it's a whole mental shift of this whole model, which is you're not just shipping software and like forgetting about it, it's shelfware. Yeah. You're actually having a relationship.
Yeah, in SaaS you have to retain them, so you're partners with them. Every customer is a partnership rather than just a customer.
But when you're building things, there are particular pathologies that arise from not talking to your customers. Like building things because they're fun and cool.
Yes.
People should not be making technical decisions on that basis. And if you're talking to your customers regularly and you know what kind of pain you're going to be subject to, it factors into your calculations.
Well, maybe just to round that out, in terms of being able to get that customer empathy across the organization, but specifically to engineering, how do you go about implementing that? How much time should they spend? How many customers should they speak to? How do you make that a process?
This has to be a rotation. If it's not a rotation, it will fall unevenly and unequally on the people who are most willing to do it, which is not fair.
Yeah, we have a support and operations day, one supporter for every engineer, where they tag along, ride along with the operations team that their product supports, as well as the support teams, listen to customer calls, sometimes like give the support person solutions via Slack while the customer's on the phone.
Must be fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's definitely fun. It's definitely fun for me. But I think there's also, you have to have an engineer ambition product fit. Yeah. Like there are some kinds of people who really want to do that. There are some kind of people who just want to build like...
There are no hard and fast rules. It's a relentlessly human scale problem. Different team, different leadership, different product. Their answers are all over the map in successful ways.
At my last startup, what we tried to do was get engineers to listen in on support calls, live, like just be a fly on the wall, just listen in, hear the empathy, hear the pain in the customer's voice, and hear how, on our side, our team members were like responding very calmly and trying to reassure and guide them to a solution. And that helped in two ways. One, you definitely hear the pain points of the customer, but two, you're like, oh, this is my teammate on the support team. I want to make that person's life better too. So it's empathy both internal and external to the company.
Great. That's super helpful, and hopefully the startups in the audience can take that because it can be that whole thing of building in isolation and not listening to the customer. Let's go back to scaling a bit, though. So, as startups grow in terms of their revenue and also their organization size, what advice would you give the engineering leaders and product leaders and CEOs out there as they build towards that? And this can be anything around processes or tools or
I can say what
organization?
not to do.
That's sometimes just as
Because I
important.
think we've done everything that shouldn't be done. At one point, we scaled from 35 to 200 engineers in 9 months, and I almost died.
9 months.
Congratulations.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
My condolences, but congratulations.
it's a really bad idea. I don't think, and I think if you ever had to do it, you better have scaled your processes and made sure that 200 people can write code without tripping over each other. Because it's easier to make 30 people write code without tripping over each other than 200 people.
Is that through systems? Is that through process?
To me, they're one and the same.
Okay.
Unless a process is automated, like it doesn't exist. Because you can tell people to follow a process, but it doesn't really work because human beings are bad at doing repetitive tasks. So I think institutional knowledge, process, unless it's codified, unless it's systemized, it doesn't exist.
When you're growing that fast, you're going to have a lot of tension between the people who built the first version of things, and they have a lot of attachment to the culture and the things that they helped build, because at the small scale, everyone is an owner, right? And there comes a point where not everyone is an owner, and you change processes so many different times. The new people come in having a different view of the company than the people who have been there for even like 6 months, and this causes a lot of clashes and a lot of dysfunction, and it makes them not feel like they're on the same team, honestly. So I agree. You should never try and... How much did you ship during those 9 months?
We did ship quite a bunch.
How good was it?
It wasn't very good.
Okay. Well, I don't think it can
killed
be
our
done. Yeah.
database, and we had to do a whole bunch of like re-architecture.
Yeah. Like the act of scaling a team consumes a lot of your team's energy and time. And I think people always think that bringing more people on means you get more done, when in fact, it's more like you're throwing more logs into the narrow river. The river takes a long time to expand.
I think one thing that worked in our favor is ZENEFITS is a collection of multiple products.
Yeah.
So each product had like 5 people, 6 people.
Microservices for
right?
teams.
Like, yes. And also I think even while hiring, you have to be really, really cognizant and self-aware about like what's the kind of person you want to hire.
Yeah.
Right? Like when
Yes,
we
that
did that
changes.
massive scale, we said we want people with really high horsepower in terms of intelligence and problem solving.
Sure. That's
So
table
like
stakes,
that's
though.
the kind of like what
the
we
kind
want.
of people that you need to hire for a company of 10 are dramatically different than the kind of people that you need to hire at a Google, and every 10x stage in between. And the people who have broad range, who can cover many of those stages, are incredibly rare. And this is very hard to tease out in an interview. It's much easier if you can look at their history, but like interviewing someone to come from a Google to a startup is just as risky as hiring somebody to work in a distributed team for the first time, or hiring someone straight out of college. Like the unknown unknowns there vastly outnumber the known unknowns, and people don't really think of this as being a skill set the same way that databases are a skill
hiring
set.
somebody from the college is much lower risk than
It is, because you
somebody
can
from
shape
Google.
them in ways that a senior person is like, they have taken a path, and they are much more who they are going to become.
Yeah, I think there's actually 3 main hazards in hiring too fast. One is there's a dilution of culture. It's hard to maintain culture as you're growing, doubling in size or tripling in size in 9 months. It's hard for each of the team members that you bring on board to actually get the knowledge. So you have to spin up knowledge sessions and training and onboarding them. And it's hard to make sure that all those new team members understand how to work together and trust each other. And that's a main portion of like how you scale a team. It's all those 3 things.
You have to have buy-in from the people who have been there the longest, because they can gum up the works in so many ways that are not visible to management.
How do you think about then the profiles of the people that you hire? I don't even know. Maybe you can tell me what the organizational size is, maybe or layers is.
How comfortable are they with chaos? Is one big thing.
How comfortable they are with
Chaos. And how comfortable are they with known unknowns versus unknown unknowns? And how much ownership do they feel? Because at a startup, you need someone who can just enter a room, survey the mess, and go, I'm going to start in this corner and go, and not have any idea how they're going to clean the entire room, And a lot of amazing engineers, in particular, will freeze and need a lot more guidance. And this you can usually screen for.
I love the fact that you brought chaos into it, because one thing that I've recognized in myself is that I'm actually seeking out chaos
Oh,
in my
God, me
opportunities.
too.
It's very interesting. So as soon as something gets like, okay, I'm on cruise control, everything's set, okay, we're
Time to switch
scaling,
jobs. Yeah.
I need to do something else. I need to find some
Different
new
job,
challenge.
or do you hire in some chaos?
Sometimes it's customer driven, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's a point about like the maturity of a startup as it's a seed stage A, B, C. There's different layers
Because
of
it's
chaos.
your job to pay down that chaos and to make it not exist.
There's different profiles of people that you hire at each different stage of the company.
Well, maybe help contextualize that a little bit, just a little bit more, at least some characteristics of, I don't know, your first 10 engineers versus the 50th versus the 150th.
The first 10, definitely somebody who needs to be comfortable with change, comfortable with a whole lot of unknown unknowns, because you probably don't have a product yet, and you don't even know if that product is going to be the product forever. And of course, like there's like things change all day, every day. So somebody who's really comfortable with that,
And
right?
they need
Like,
a
so
breadth of skills,
Yeah.
right? You don't want engineers who like to go deep on one thing, because that will kill you. You need people
At the
who are
beginning,
jack
you
of
need-
all jacks.
Yeah, they're often dilettantes, you know? They often like kind of hot from tech, and they're interested and curious in lots of things. These kinds of people are often incredibly bored by, oh my God, you're telling me what I'm going to be doing for the next year?
I have a specific story about this, and it's going to involve actually your former co-founder at Parse, because his prior startup was acquired by Salesforce. It was called eTax.
Ilya.
And I remember Ilya, and I also remember Howie Liu, two great entrepreneurs. They were co-founders of eTax. We brought them into the Salesforce fold in the family, and they were this small, scrappy upstart, you know, really looking for chaos. They were unbelievable technologists, unbelievable entrepreneurs. We brought them to the Salesforce fold, and we're like, here you go. This is it. Like, here's where the coffee is, here's where your desk is, and here's what you're doing, and we're going to put you off in this corner. And both Ilya and Howie were like, let's see a little bit, and then, yeah, I'm going to do something else. Yeah. So Ilya went to form Parse.
Yep.
Howie went to form Airtable, two great companies, and like, thank goodness they did, because it's just better for the industry. And like, that's the kind of personality that you want in the earlier stage versus at, I'm going to like name a company, Oracle, SAP, whatever. Like, they're great companies, but it's a different profile of people that want to work there versus that want to work at eTax.
Even at like a Facebook, where they're constantly trying to say, we're a startup inside, you need to have a startup mentality, you need to move fast and break things. Even there, there's a slowness and a predictability. It is a business's job to create predictability, you know, and early stage people just do not like that. There's an allergy.
Well, how about maybe just to break it down between first 10 and somewhere in between Oracle, somewhere in that scale. Is it a gradient of change? Is it something that's decided by the organization size?
It depends a lot on the organization and what you value, because there are lots of ways to look for, like the flip side of chaos is ownership. Like at a company that's small, you require everyone to feel like they own things, that no one's going to fix it if you don't, right? Nothing is someone else's problem. And there are ways that you can institutionally say, for example, saying ask forgiveness instead of permission. You know, if you drive these things home to the point where you hear your engineers over there arguing about something, and then instead of going, oh, let's go ask the manager, they say, ask forgiveness, like then you know you've done a good job at like creating a culture of ownership and not punishing people for their mistakes.
Yeah, I think one is team size. The other is, for us, like we scaled across 3 locations. So we have Bangalore, Vancouver, and San Francisco. So depending on like how you want to set up those locations, remote is its own, like I can talk about it for hours in terms of like our experiences with remote and what works and what didn't work. So it really depends on a whole host of things, culture, because every person you hire, whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not, is going to alter your culture in like ways that you don't even know about.
This is why it's important to fire fast.
Fire fast.
But also back on the culture, if you're a 10-person startup, the next person you hire is going to be whatever, 10% of the order, not quite 10%,
Yes.
right? Yeah. And so at the smaller scales, you have to be very, very, very careful about who you let into that gate, into that family, who's going to be owner of the company.
You're going to be staring at their faces every day.
If you're a 100-person company, you hire one more person, okay, it's 1%. If you're 1,000, okay, diminishing returns. I mean, in terms of like their impact on culture, their impact on ownership, their impact on trust with respect to other team members.
Yeah, I was lucky enough that my first 10 engineers were all from my network and people I had worked with before.
It's also the case that the quote-unquote bar of engineering people often go to startups when they can't pass the Google bar, and they thrive and they flourish because it demands so much more just creativity, ad hoc, like creative thinking rather than, extremely rigorous, engineering chops. And a lot of times these people kind of move into management as the company grows because they're amazing hires, but they don't follow the same pattern.
Yeah, well, let me maybe just say, talk a little bit about the hires. How do you guys think about the market here? Super competitive. We, if just a little bit. If we already said that you can't hire salespeople here because it's too expensive, how can you hire engineers? When you have Google, you have Facebook, you have Salesforce in the backyard. We all know it's hard and competitive. What are some of the tips and tricks that you can share with the group out here to be able to help them understand how you were able to get some of the best engineers?
Well, 95% of the population lives outside the US, so 95% of great engineers must be outside the US. So we went global. We hired from anywhere and everywhere we could find great talent. And we set up shop in Vancouver, where it was so much more easier to bring people in. So that office is super multicultural, multifaceted, so many different viewpoints of people from everywhere. At one point, we were hiring new grads from St. Petersburg University who had interned in VK. So that was like a very specific target that we went after.
If you're optimizing for great engineers, going distributed is the right thing to do. And in fact, we are going distributed early, and I do believe in it. But if you're optimizing for great teams, you have to be very careful where you hire, and you have to be very careful where you invest your energy, because bringing distributed teams up to the same level of functionality, I'm not convinced that it's possible. It might be. I haven't seen it. It's certainly harder and requires a lot more administrative investment.
So when you have distributed offices, you need to make sure you have local teams, local managers,
yes,
local projects.
People
local
have to
purpose.
be sitting in the same room if they're going to,
Wait, so Charity, to your point, are you saying that you need to have a kind of a centralized team, but you can have a distributed engineering organization?
You can't have a distributed person. You have to have a distributed team.
Okay.
And you can't really have satellite people who feel like a real part of the team. Like, I believe that this is possible. We're just very tribal creatures. I believe that the best teams sit in the same room, or are very near, or are all distributed, right? But the best teams sit in the same room. That's how you move the fastest.
I would second that opinion. I think it's really easy, or it's easier to have empathy, trust, get on a whiteboard and talk together and collaborate if you're all in one location.
Yep.
But that said, we can't discount the fact that it's very expensive to be in San Francisco. It's really hard to hire here. It's very competitive.
But it is the best place in the world.
But it's the best place in the world.
Well, maybe just to help make it concrete, for each of the organizations that we have here, what percentage of your engineers are in the Bay Area versus outside?
For us, it just switched last month, where we had more engineers in Vancouver than in SF. So we have close to 40% of the team in Vancouver, 35 in SF, and 25 in Bangalore.
And for me, I have a team of a little over 200 in my engineering team. San Francisco is one of the smaller locations. So I have SF in Sunnyvale, so the Bay Area. I have about 90 people in Montreal, Canada. Go Canada. I have about 50 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. This is a super interesting place. It's offshore, but not that far into the time zone. And then I do have a small group of folks in India.
Time zones are super key to this. I have 30 people, and about 80% of them are here in SF.
Great. Just to make sure that we're watching time here. Now, I want to kind of switch the topic to something that I think we all read about, and it's kind of that mythical entity called the 10x engineer. And I think there's, it is that person that you can hire that can create 10x the productivity, or at least that's maybe what we all can agree upon. What does that person look like to you?
Yeah.
And how would you actually quantify that? Because it seems like is it somebody that actually his fingers move 10x faster? What is it? Charity?
So, I got into an argument with my old boss, Kevin Lacker, about this. He's like, well, clearly you can have 10x engineers, because here's a person who's only written Hello World, and I can do 10 times better than that. I'm like, fuck, that is something a math major would say. So setting that aside, take the average engineer, do these 10x engineers exist? And obviously there are people who can be way more productive than other people, but aside from being technically true, I think in the common parlance, it's only ever true when you have those individuals who can bring up, 10 people to a level higher than they would have gotten on their own or with any other manager. It's the people, like any one engineer, you can't build a company around them. I mean, we've all learned this from distributed systems, right? You can't have a single node that if they fail, you're fucked. You just can't let that happen. But you can have, pillars, people who are so good at educating and driving consensus and who are so respected that people will follow them. And that greases the wheels and makes your entire organization better. And these people, I find, are often the people who are senior but have gone back and forth between IC and management.
My opinion on 10x engineer, first of all, is there's a reason why there's an X in there, 10x. It's about the multiplier effect, and that can be how much they can do individually, and like if they're 10x a regular engineer, or if they magnify the effects of the rest of their teammates by 10. And there's different ways of doing that. So they can be like really good facilitators and coaches and design advocates, or they can be headphones on in a corner coding. But I think, so that's the 10x engineer. I would suspect that there's also like a 10x salesperson and a 10x marketer and a 10x support person.
Our ability to identify them is difficult because it's very contextual.
Yeah, different people are 10x in different ways.
Exactly. You can have one person who is a 10x engineer at this company in this situation, and then the company outgrows that ability. Or he moves or she moves to another company and can't be a 10x engineer there. It's like magic when it happens. It's lightning in a bottle.
Interesting. So it depends on the context they're in, maybe the skill set they have, the people they're
around.
around.
I think it goes back to the engineer ambition, engineer product match. When everything clicks, somebody's so productive that it feels like 10x.
And they have joy too, right? You can't do that without a lot of joy in what you're doing.
Got it. Well, thank you. This was a great panel. Thank you for putting your hands together.